neither campaign really talked about AI much at all. My opinion was they didn't know how the public perceived AI, so there were no votes to be won by talking about AI on the campaign trails. But we knew it was going to be fundamental to whatever happened once the administration, whichever one it was going to be, came into office. Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Show, the podcast that helps your business grow smarter by making AI approachable and actionable. My name is Paul Raitzer. I'm the founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute, and I'm your host. Each week, I'm joined by my co-host and Marketing AI Institute Chief Content Officer, Mike Kaput, as we break down all the AI news that matters and give you insights and perspectives that you can use to advance your company and your career. Join us as we accelerate AI literacy for all. Welcome to episode 123 of the Artificial Intelligence Show. I'm your host, Paul Raitzer, along with my co-host, Mike Kaput. So we had an election last week in the United States. Mike and I have a policy not to discuss politics on the show. No one cares about our political opinions, and too many tech podcasts went the way of political shows, in my feeling, over the last year. So Mike and I have a commitment to you not to do that. However, when it influences AI and the future of AI, we need to talk about it. So we will be discussing some early signs of what we think the new administration means to AI and technology more broadly. So that is going to be a main topic today. We're also going to get in some rumors, I guess. I don't know. It's being reported that maybe the frontier models have plateaued in their training. So we're going to kind of unpack that because that's a very important thing. And then Mike and I are actually going to share a really cool internal use case that we used ChatGPT for in particular for some planning that I think people could apply as they're doing their 2025 planning, and then a whole bunch of rapid fire items. So we got a lot to cover. This week's episode is brought to us again by AI for Agencies Summit. This is our virtual event, the second year it's happening. It is occurring Wednesday, November 20th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. If you cannot make that time zone, you can get on demand. So there will be an option to get the summit on demand. It's an incredible lineup. It's going to be packed with basically trying to figure out how to help you drive AI transformation in your own agency and for your clients. If you're on the brand side, let your agencies know about the summit because you want agencies that are proactively seeking to drive AI literacy and capabilities within their own firms. And this is a great head start for them to do that. So you can go to AI4 agencies.com. That's AI4 agencies.com. Check out the agenda, check out the speaker lineup, and then click register now. You can use promo code AI4ward200 for $200 off. So again, that is AI4 agencies.com. And the promo code is AI4ward200. And that will get you $200 off the ticket. And again, if you can't make the live event, check out the on-demand ticket options as well. All right, Mike, the topic neither of us really wants to talk about that has to do with politics, we're going to talk about. So let's do this in our style is as objective and unbiased as we can humanly be when it comes to these things and just be report the facts as they appear to be. So that is our kind of promise to you is we're going to do our very best anytime we talk about this topic related to politics to just give you the facts and let you all figure it out for yourselves from there.
All right, Paul. So let's dive into it. According to a few reports we're starting to get, it seems like possibly President-elect Donald Trump is potentially signaling some pretty significant changes to the nation's artificial intelligence strategy. So it sounds like at the center of his administration's plans might be a potential dismantling of President Biden's landmark AI executive order, which established safety and privacy standards for AI development. We know for a fact that the incoming administration is shaped in some ways by several key advisors, most notably Elon Musk, who contributed over $100 million to Trump's campaign and has been outspoken about his views on how AI should be developed. We're kind of seeing among the most immediate changes expected is potentially the elimination of the AI Safety Institute that is created under Biden's executive order in order to evaluate advanced AI systems. However, as always, tech companies, think tanks are kind of racing to have their own influence. Some of them are trying to convince Congress to make the institute permanent before Trump takes office in January. And the new administration's AI agenda seems to be aligning around reducing regulatory barriers and promoting AI development that, in their words, is kind of rooted in free speech. So this kind of pushes back against what some Trump allies kind of term, quote unquote, like woke AI with like biased or politically skewed results. And then, of course, there's also going to be what we've heard rumblings about is trade policies that could also impact AI development. Trump has proposed a 10% blanket tariff on US imports and 60% on Chinese products, all of which would affect some of the hardware and products that go into artificial intelligence. And we don't seem to have any real clarity on kind of what would replace this. Would it be just an unfettered set of policies? Would there be additional regulations? We're not sure yet. So, Paul, it kind of seems like we could see some swift, sudden changes to AI policy under the Trump administration. How are you seeing this playing out right now?
Yeah, I think there are breadcrumbs. There's a couple articles that came out over the weekend we'll put into the show notes about this, but the way I kind of think about this is to follow the money is a good way to do it. So while the campaigns, neither campaign really talked about AI much at all, and we talked about this on the show, that my opinion was they didn't know how the public perceived AI, so there were no votes to be won by talking about AI on the campaign trails. But we knew it was going to be fundamental to whatever happened once the administration, whichever one it was going to be, came into office. So when we look at the Trump administration, you can look back over the last year plus of who are the major technology organizations and individuals that backed the campaign. You mentioned Elon, obviously, but Andreessen Horowitz came out a few months back
Right.
and kind of counter to their traditional views, they went all in on Trump. Now, they published in fall 2023, we talked about this on the show, the Techno Optimist Manifesto. So if you want to understand why A16Z and Andreessen Horowitz would back Trump, you could probably go read the Techno Optimist Manifesto, and that will give you a good sense. In essence, they are very, very pro startups. So they want to enable the startup ecosystem to innovate as much as possible with as little regulation as possible. And crypto, those are two or three
Yeah.
big areas: startups, regulation, crypto. Um, so they listed several reasons they believe the Biden administration is stifling startups through overregulation and potentially needless taxation. I guess sort of like the tipping point for them was the Biden administration had proposed a tax on unrealized capital gains,
Mm.
meaning as startups become higher and higher in value, that they wanted to actually tax that increase in valuation before the money was actually realized by anybody. And that was what they claim was the big break for them. Another major player to look into is Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the kingmaker for JD Vance. So when Vance was elected to Senate in 2022, it was Thiel who funded that campaign, who basically pushed for him to get into that position. And Thiel, along with David Sachs and some others, are the ones who basically pushed for JD Vance to get the ticket as the vice president. So Vance was put into power through his VC connections. Um, you can go into Peter Thiel's history. He co-founder of PayPal with Elon Musk, Palantir Technologies Founders Fund, so he's a VC as well. He was the first in Silicon Valley to publicly support Trump back in 2016, gave a bunch of money, was very vocal, appeared at the Republican National Convention in 2016, then pushed for Vance to be involved. He's a libertarian, which is someone who advocates for minimal government intervention in individuals' personal and economic lives. So again, get rid of the regulation, let technology do its thing, maximize personal freedoms while minimizing the role of the state. And then there's David Sachs, the All In podcast. I'm sure there's some of our listeners that are also All In podcast listeners. As you would be aware, David Sachs, who was a founding member and chief operating officer of PayPal back with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all those guys, he was very, very vocal on the All In podcast and got Trump. I think Trump appeared on the All In podcast, if I'm not mistaken. He was also the founder, Sachs was, of Yammer, which he sold to Microsoft in 2012, and he also has a VC firm. And then obviously Elon Musk. So again, if you want to know the general technology agenda and where AI may go, you can look at some of those key players and what they have publicly stated about their beliefs. They're going to have an influence. Now, not all of Silicon Valley was supportive of the Trump campaign and the next Trump administration, but they certainly all lined up over the weekend to congratulate. So you can go and look at Bezos and Bill Gates and Aidan Gomez of Cohere and Jack Clark of Anthropic and Sundar Pichai of Google and Mark Benioff of Salesforce and Greg Brockman of OpenAI. Every single one of them had the congratulatory tweets, and we're looking forward to working with your administration. And again, whether they supported that administration or not, you're going to have to work with them. So at the end of the day, I kind of made my scorecard, right away. I had this scorecard before I started looking into the rest of the stuff. And the losers, in my opinion, climate regulation, done. They're going to do anything in their power to not worry about climate change, and they're certainly not going to care about whether or not advancing AI impacts the climate. So that is a direct loser. The executive order, as you called for, is done. They will can that as soon as possible. So that is a loser. A dark horse loser here is OpenAI and Sam Altman. And the reason for that is Elon Musk's influence. So as we have talked about many times on the show, Elon was a co-founder of OpenAI. He put the first 40 million in. He created the name. He lost a power struggle in 2019 when he tried to roll OpenAI into Tesla. Sam came to power, and Elon has a beef with Sam, and it's very public. And Elon tends to hold grudges, and so there's maybe Sam and Elon kind of come to peace, but if they don't, Elon could probably, with his influence, make Sam and OpenAI's lives miserable if he chooses to. The other side to that is xAI, Elon Musk's startup AI company. You could imagine him getting way more support and power for his own AI startup because he's bought himself some pretty significant influence. And then open source is probably the other and maybe the biggest winner is when you remove regulation, you limit the government's say in the downsides of open source and acceleration of technology. So the EAC movement, that acceleration at all costs, they're a winner too. And so open source probably is a byproduct of that. And that's one of the A16Z plays, is they want kind of this freedom to innovate there. The one big variable in all this, and I don't know how this plays out, but the reality is Trump and Elon Musk both have very large egos, very large personalities, and they are both alphas. And how those two get along for 4 years is going to be really interesting, because Elon, while he may not hold some official position in the administration, he is certainly going to have influence. And if he starts getting a lot of public credit for things that happen, you almost wonder if that doesn't create some friction. So I have no idea, but it'll be really interesting to watch how that power dynamic plays out, and what kind of ends up happening. And again, keep in mind with Elon, he is historically a supporter of Democrats. He's very public about the fact that he voted for Hillary Clinton. It's rumored he voted for Biden. When he took over Twitter in April 2022, he tweeted, "For Twitter to deserve public trust, it must be politically neutral," which effectively means upsetting the far right and the far left equally. So Elon's move to support Trump wasn't assumed all this time. I mean, Elon has tried to remain somewhat independent, but there was a shift, and some believe the shift actually occurred when he got snubbed at the electric vehicle event at the White House a couple years back when he wasn't invited there. And it ended up being because it was in essence, a union event, and Tesla is not a union shop. But it seems like that may have played a role in him feeling burned by the current administration and shifting his support. But who knows? But yeah, it's a dynamic situation. And like I said, Mike and I will keep tabs on it and report the facts to you, again, as an unbiased and objective way as possible, just observing the space. And so those are some of the things that I see early on, but I think we're going to learn a lot more in the months ahead leading up to the inauguration in January.
Yeah, we'll definitely see how this all plays out in practice. But you mentioned this briefly. It just seems like at the moment, I would not be betting on anything other than EAC movement. The effective accelerationism seems to be the order of the day here.
Yeah, and I think this probably also, I hadn't thought about this one. It probably accelerates the states like California
Mhm.
being way more aggressive. So if you remember when SB 1047, that's right.
Yep. Yeah.
When Newsom did not sign that bill, what we said on that episode was that I thought the Biden administration and Nancy Pelosi told them to pump the brakes,
Mhm.
that federal wanted to have a say in this. And Newsom called like all hands in California legislation last week after the election. And so I would not be surprised at all if you don't see states like California race to put some state level legislation in place.
Mm.
I hadn't really thought about that until now, but I could definitely see that being a major play to try and bypass some of the stuff that they know that this administration is going to do too.
Yeah, and while I don't certainly don't expect Silicon Valley to go away anytime soon, you could see some really big moves depending on how regulation at the state level happens of
Yeah.
where some of these companies are built.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Elon's already made that pretty public with his efforts to build more in Texas. But again, like the SB 1047, the key to that legislation is
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you're in California or not. It's
Yeah.
if you do business in California.
Mm.
And so, California more than any other state can have an impact on the economy with their choices. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be fascinating.
All right. So next up, we are seeing a bit of a unexpected challenge confronting OpenAI. The pace of improvement in their core AI technology might be slowing down. We got a report this past week from the Information that the company's upcoming flagship model, which is codenamed Orion, is kind of revealing the limitations of current AI development approaches. So the Information is reporting that while Orion does appear to surpass previous models, the improvement is notably smaller than the big leap we saw between GPT-3 and GPT-4. And some OpenAI employees report that Orion just isn't consistently better at certain tasks, even particularly coding, despite higher operational costs. So this basically is starting to challenge one of the fundamental assumptions in AI that we've talked about a bunch, which is scaling laws. The systems will continue to improve at a consistent rate given more data in compute. And it seems like that data piece could be the bottleneck here. They are reporting that the amount of high quality training data is creating a real struggle for OpenAI. Apparently, they have largely exhausted their publicly available text and data sources. They've started to experiment with AI generated training data, but this is creating complexity. The Information is reporting that Orion sometimes mimics the limitations of the older models used to generate its training data. So, in response, OpenAI is trying a couple things, it sounds like. They have established a dedicated foundations team led by Nick Ryder to address the data shortage and explore the future of AI scaling. They're also looking more at post-training improvements, like developing new reasoning models like O1 that take more time to think before providing answers. So, Paul, I guess my first and biggest question is, are we actually slowing down here?
Yeah, this is fascinating. So I don't feel like anything in this article was new, but this thing was cooking on Twitter over the weekend. Like everyone was reacting to this. There was a bunch of OpenAI employees responding to it. So the co-founder and CTO at Writer, which is a Gen AI writing platform that we're very familiar with. He tweeted, "We've been discussing this for some time. There's minimal improvement or return beyond a trillion parameters, with only very small gains from around 150 billion to 1 trillion. We have publicly stated that our our Palmera LLM achieves improvements by deepening the model architecture, not by increasing the number of parameters. Um, but then you had other people, like Clive Chan from OpenAI. He's like, what it comes next is relatively little new science, but instead years of grinding engineering to try all the new obvious ideas and the new paradigms, scale it up, speed it up. Maybe there's another wall after this one, but for now there's 10X's as far as the eye can see. So he's like, just the headline's misleading basically. You got Dan Schipper, who's a co-founder and CEO at Every. The message that this headline conveys is at odds with what people inside the big labs are actually feeling, saying. It's technically correct, but the takeaway for the casual reader, AI progress is slowing, is exactly the opposite of what I'm hearing. We have Adam.GPT, who's an OpenAI employee, said traditional scaling laws, which focus on pre-training larger models for longer, is absolutely still a thing. That aspect of scale is still foundational. There now happens to be another scaling thing, and together those two things are poised to unlock amazing capabilities. Noam Brown, who's fundamental to the O1 model, we've talked about Noam multiple times. He said there won't be a slowdown in AI progress anytime soon. So, and then like ironically, Sam Altman did an interview with Gary Tan from Y Combinator. And this is last week. We'll put the interview in the show notes. I was watching it on YouTube. I don't know if it's a podcast too or not, but it's definitely on YouTube. And Sam said these things are going to compound. We could hit some unexpected wall, or we could be missing something, but it looks like there's a lot of compounding in front of us. We are not near the saturation point. The models are going to get so much better so quickly. And when Gary asked him, what are you excited about in 2025? He said AGI. So I don't know. So I think like there was a couple of things I went back to on this, because again, the article, I guess maybe it was more explicitly saying that it thinks the labs have run into a plateau on the scaling laws.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's new, because like we talked recently about Ilya Sutskever, and he was talking about the need to like how these labs all know to do like more data, more training time, but that there needs to be some new paths where you push hard. And that the challenge a lot of these labs were facing was which new path to bet on, that there was different ways now to go about trying to drive like these leaps forward. But the thing we talked about, I can't remember what episode it was on. We'll have to go back and look. We'll put it in the show notes. But what I said was, it might have been when we first talked about Orion, that the thing that to me was the $1 trillion question was, could OpenAI create a new frontier model that stayed at the top of the leaderboard for another 2 years? Because when they introduced GPT-4 in March of 23, everybody chased that model since then. And it seems like everybody just sort of caught up to that. Like no one is clearly ahead of a GPT-4, GPT-4o model, but they're all sort of comparable. And so the question became, well, why hasn't someone taken a leap yet? Is it because the training in this way is just kind of like, this is it, this is the smartest models we get? The investments coming from big tech certainly didn't imply that. The demand for NVIDIA chips certainly didn't imply that. So the unknown was, well, has OpenAI or has anybody else cracked the next breakthrough that allows them to create a model that is so far ahead of everybody else, like GPT-4 was? And that's the part that seems up in the air at the moment. Now, as we talked about last week, OpenAI seems to think reasoning is the key, that their series of O1 models. And I'm a believer that we're going to get the full O1 sometime between November 21st, when I think that there's a developer day, an OpenAI developer day, and November 30th, when we would be at the 2-year anniversary. Yeah. Wait, did I get my numbers right? Yeah. 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT coming out. So I think we're going to get the O1 full model. Now, what it's capable of doing beyond what we already see, I'm not sure. But I think that there is a real question here about whether or not these frontier models are sort of commoditized at this point, that they have somewhat plateaued in they're just going to keep leapfrogging each other every 3 to 6 months, and there isn't a breakthrough really left at that model of text in and text out. But where I think this becomes interesting is like, what are the things that are going to differentiate as we move forward?
Mm.
And the things that seem, because Demis Hassabis has said the same thing, that there's like 2 to 3 breakthroughs left before we just get to AGI. And reasoning seems to be a big one, like that everybody's working on that. And so O1 is sort of the first one to market that has that clearly, but we know everybody else is working on it. Multimodal seems to be really critical. So again, keep in mind, a lot of these previous generation models were text in, text out. So they were trained on the text of the internet. They were not trained on videos, audio, images as a single model. But we know that's what Google is trying to do with Gemini, that you train it on multimodal, and then that opens up a whole new universe of data to train these models on. And maybe that's a path to go down, is pushing hard on the training there. The other one that comes to mind to me is the path, and maybe these are some of the things Ilya's thinking about when he's saying like there needs to be, you got to pick which path to bet on. So you could bet on reasoning, you could bet on multimodal training, you could bet on symphony of models where the frontier model functions as the conductor, and then all the smaller models do their thing within specialized areas that don't require as much compute. And so you can imagine pushing hard on this sort of like central hub, which is the frontier model, and then all of this symphony that allows them to kind of work in collaboration together. And then the other one where Google has the massive advantage is self-play and recursive self-improvement. And that comes from reinforcement learning, like AlphaGo and AlphaZero and things like that. And so those are 4, again, I have no idea what the next breakthroughs are, but from everything I've heard in these interviews, they seem to think they know the collection of things it could be.
Mhm.
And what they need to now do is push compute, push different testing, and see which of these things plays out to unlock these frontier models to maybe then take the leap. And maybe it's like a couple of these things in combination. But all that being said, for our listeners, this is all fascinating. But for our listeners, here's the reality. It's irrelevant to you if they make a leap forward next year. Like, they probably will. But from what Mike and I see every day talking to big enterprises and small, is the absorption of the current capabilities is so low. The value you can create in your company using today's models is so significant and
Mhm.
so untapped that it doesn't really matter. Like, do we get GPT-5 or Gemini 2 or Claude 4, or did their training runs not work? Like, it's all fun to talk about, but for you, focus on using what we have today to do your plans for next year, to build a more efficient team, to drive productivity and creativity and innovation. Like, the next main topic, Mike and I are going to share a way we did this, but like, that's my main message to you is don't get caught up worrying about all this stuff. Just go do things, like
Yeah.
take action, because there's so much value sitting there to be created with the models we already have.
And realistically, we don't need that many more breakthroughs for there to be even more disruption, right? I mean, even if it's not as big a leap next time forward, these are still improving. The
Yeah.
models are still improving. We're just debating like how much.
Yeah. I
So,
think the fusion of the current capabilities would be enough disruption to last us like 5 years.
yeah.
So they're going to get smarter. They're going to get more generally capable. They're going to be able to take actions. They're going to do all these things we talk about, have worldviews, things like that. But that stuff may not create value for your company for another year or two. What we have today can transform your company right now.
So let's maybe then kind of ease into the third big topic and talk about a way to do that. Like,
Yeah.
we wanted to, you and I had talked before this episode, Paul, and we just kind of wanted to share like a practical use case of how even just using the latest capabilities of ChatGPT alone, last week, we dramatically accelerated planning and innovation for both Marketing AI Institute and Smarter X. So do you want to maybe walk us through what you and I had worked on?
Yeah. So basically the way this works is, as the CEO, a lot of my work is on kind of the vision and the high level strategy for the organization, thinking through our revenue channels, thinking through our current growth opportunities, future growth opportunities, things like that. And so as I was going through building our 2025 like growth matrix, I sort of landed on this idea that we'd had a couple years back. And it's related to like the media content side of our business. So Mike, as you're aware, is the chief content officer. So I go to Mike with this idea. And I was like, listen, I think we have this opportunity to really scale what we're doing, but to create like tremendous value, like a high velocity of value creation across different industries and for different personas. Um, and so I kind of explained the concept to Mike and he's like, yeah, I love it. Like we should do that. And it's like, okay, now what do we do? And so Mike and I spent, 9 years at marketing agency together, and we've built plenty of strategies and campaigns. And there's always that like to go from idea to action is really hard because someone has to commit the time to build the brief, to go do the research, to do the initial planning so that you can then react to that together. So for me, I was like, okay, I got to put a forcing function in place. I got a bunch of travel coming up. Like, I'm just going to put a meeting for Mike and I. It was last Friday, I think we met. And so by putting that meeting on the calendar, it was like, okay, this will force us to now talk about it. But the Thursday, the day before, we had nothing. We had like blank page. It's like, okay, we have this idea, but like, what do we do? And so what I then did is rather than Mike and I showing up to that meeting and spending 2 hours just kind of bouncing this idea around, I used ChatGPT to develop drafts of the plan, thinking through various planning, production, promotion, performance, like kind of like the key areas we look at different ways. And I'm basically just giving some prompts to this thing that's saying like, okay, I've got this business idea. It's for our Smarter X brand. And this, I'm using my co-CEO GPT that I built. And so it understands that brand and knows what we do and it knows our revenue channels. And I just said, help me think through this business model. And it's like, okay, great. Like, what do you want to do? And so I kind of like had a conversation around that. And then it was really good. And this is all happening over like 3 minutes. And then I said, okay, create a task list for the planning and production of the content that we're going to create without getting into all the details. And then I was like, okay, we're going to do this for different industries and personas. How do we identify and prioritize verticals and personas, to help drive our decision making? And it created, again, an amazing brief on this thing. Now, as I said, Mike and I did this stuff for a living. Like we have the ability to do this. But the reality is for us to do this would probably have taken 10, 20 hours to do the kind of planning that went into this. Now, there was nothing that ChatGPT output that we wouldn't have probably thought about if we had enough time. Like if Mike or I could go away for 3 days and just think deeply about this idea, we may have come up with 80, 90% of what ChatGPT did. But the reality is ChatGPT did this in 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thinking here was rather than Mike and I sitting staring at a blank page and ideating from zero, we now had, I don't know, it's probably like 2,000 words or so structured really nicely in an outline and brief for us to react to. And so we get into the meeting on Friday and I said to Mike, I was like, let's just walk through what ChatGPT did. And let's start talking through things we like, things we don't, if we have any other ideas. And there came a time, Mike, like 15 minutes into it, we're like, hold on a second. This is actually a really interesting idea. Let's like lean into this for a couple minutes. And honestly, it ended up leading to a conversation that may change like our whole go-to-market strategy for Smarter X next year.
Mm-hmm.
And if we hadn't had ChatGPT develop the brief, I don't know that we would have got there. And then I go away this week, and then we run into AI Agency Summit, and then it's Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden it's middle of December, and Mike and I haven't made any progress. Instead, we're going to spend the next 30 days pushing hard on the few things that came out of it that were actionable. So that to me is like a fundamental way to use these tools today. Use them as planning assistants. And then the other thing we did is we traditionally use Zoom. But for this one, I really wanted to try Google Meet. Now, I'd had a meeting last week where we did the video, the transcript, and the summary with Google Meet, and I was pretty impressed. Like it was really solid. And so we have Google Workspace. So I said to Mike, like, let's try Google Meet for this one. And so we did Google Meet and we used it, did the video, the transcript, the summary, which was great. So the whole thing, Mike and I met for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I feel like we made a month's worth of progress by just infusing ChatGPT in like that brainstorm process. So I don't know. How did you feel about it, Mike? I mean, you lived through the experience too.
Yeah, no, I felt very similarly. What really struck me too is like everything you just described is like if we had a really smart employee like brief us
Yeah.
on initial ideas, which then gave us the bandwidth and the time to actually, I would argue, do what we should be doing and do best, which is actually exploring and operationalizing more ideas or creating our own based on that. We would
Yep.
never have gotten there. We would have spent all the time getting the initial brainstorming done. And like you said, nothing would have happened as fast as it happened.
Yep. Yeah. One other note I'll make here, and I mentioned this to Mike, was so I did all this in ChatGPT. Then, because we're a Google Workspace shop, I copied and pasted everything because I wanted to share it with Mike. Now I can share the chat, but we wanted to be able to comment on it. We wanted to be able to like interact with it. So I needed that ChatGPT output into Google Docs. So you copy and paste, and unfortunately, all the formatting goes away. And
Right.
I don't know, maybe there's something I'm doing wrong there, but I've tested multiple ways, and it just jacks up the formatting. It puts all the pound signs and everything in there. And so then as Mike and I are going through, I'm like changing the format. It's kind of annoying. Now that's an opportunity for Google if you think
Yeah.
about it, because direct integration into Google Docs would be brilliant. But I'm not saying ChatGPT per se. Like if you use Google Gems, you can export to Docs right away. There's actually a button to send it to Docs, like share into the Docs, and it does nice formatting. The problem is Gems seems way behind custom GPTs at the moment. So like I went in and tried to do the same thing with a gem. One, I can't find any information about the context window for the instructions. I don't know what the character limit is. Like I know
Right.
in ChatGPT it's 8,000. I can't find that anywhere for gems. There's no guide when you're in there. There's no ability to do conversation starters, which is like a really awesome feature of ChatGPT. I don't know how to do those. I think the gems are 100% private. They don't train on them. I think if I share them with you, only you can see them, but I have no idea. Like, and so just a note to the Google team, like gems is a huge opportunity, but I can't find anything other than like the blog post announcing that they exist in August.
Yeah.
And then like some user generated guides to it. But even those didn't answer the questions I had about character limits and conversation starters and things like that. So I feel like if Google Docs had Gemini baked right in, because if you go into Google Docs and just use the help me write thing, it does not do anything like what ChatGPT or Gemini are capable of doing. So like, I just want the functionality to do my planning right in Google Docs
Yeah.
with Gemini without having to go through all this other stuff. And that does not exist. But because Google has Google Workspace, there's a big opportunity if they can crack actually making gems highly functional and valuable, and that integration with Google Docs right away. Now, Microsoft obviously has the same capability with ChatGPT and Word, but that would be a great unlock in terms of value creation.
Yeah, and you and I had even tested. Obviously, there is Gemini within Docs, but even then, I don't know if it's due to what information it pulls, what model is being used. But like we tried more sophisticated prompts right in Google Docs,
Yeah.
and it's just not there. The same prompt works really well if you go open up your own instance of Gemini. So
Yeah, it's
we
very
know,
limited in its
right,
capabilities in Docs.
right.
It is not the same chat bot for sure. Which maybe that's the need, is like stop trying to be one thing in one doc and one in the other. It's
Yeah.
just integrate the things. So yeah, so the moral story here is push on using these tools as a planning tool for next year. Like there's a ton of value sitting there, and it can really accelerate things. Like again, I always use these examples of what would I pay to have that function. So forget $20 a month for ChatGPT. For Mike and I, it's $40 a month or whatever that number is. If I would have done that myself, we're talking 10 to 20 hours. What is 10 to 20 hours of my time worth?
Right.
A lot to me. So the fact that I didn't have to do that, if that was just like, hey, you can use it to help with this plan, what would you pay for it? I'm probably like, I don't know, $2,000. Like if a ChatGPT is going to create this for me, that Mike and I could just spend 2 hours reacting to it instead, I would have happily paid thousands of dollars as a business user for that one use case.
Yeah, that's incredible. And like we've talked about a couple times, it's like whether you're trying to figure out more use cases or trying to figure out how to get started, go create a GPT that helps you do your job, like
Yep.
co-CEO. Just think of it that way. Put your job description in and be working with it regularly.
Yep.
All right, let's dive into our rapid fire topics this week. So first up, we have another interesting case study, not ours this time around, but Visa, the credit card company, has apparently deployed over 500 generative AI applications across its operations, according to a new report in the Wall Street Journal. So these applications span a ton of different functions, from security tools that detect bugs in code to specialized chatbots serving as subject matter experts. This initiative, led by the company's technology president, Rajat Taneja, reflects a deliberate kind of go-fast approach designed to address two critical challenges: staying ahead of increasingly sophisticated fraud attempts and maximizing AI's potential benefits before Visa's competitors do. So they've actually invested over $3 billion in AI and data infrastructure over the past decade to support this vision. One particularly notable implementation targets something called enumeration attacks, which currently cost the company over $1 billion annually in fraud losses. Other tools they've developed help customers customize billing cycles and streamline various operational processes. And what's really interesting here is just kind of how all in the company has been on this. They established really strong governance infrastructure and data protections first, and then encouraged their teams across all different business functions to participate in AI implementation. Looking ahead, Taneja, who is the technology president in charge of this, envisions a future where human employees each oversee 8 to 10 different AI-powered digital workers, creating kind of a hybrid workforce model. So, Paul, this certainly seems like an enterprise succeeding with AI and getting real value out of it, which is a little contrary to some of the reports we've seen saying that nobody is getting value out of this stuff.
Yeah, we're always on the lookout for brands that are telling their stories of success. They're hard to come by, honestly. Yeah, this is interesting, and it makes sense, like a lot on the fraud side, that they would have a ton of use
Yeah.
cases there. But simultaneously, we came across a information exclusive for like their pro subscription, which Mike and I have, that had the generative AI spending of 50 companies from Coke to Walmart. And so we were kind of scouring through that, looking at seeing like which models they use, what are their use cases. And, I think similar to Visa, some of the things that surface is customer support. Like everybody is building chatbots for customer support and success. That seemed almost universal. Marketing and content generation, which is no surprise. Operational efficiency. Companies like Goldman Sachs and Toyota deploying AI for internal tools. Coding is obviously a big one, and then sales enablement. Those are categorically like the big things that jumped out from these 50 companies. And again, they're big brands. So they were looking at IPG and DoorDash and AT&T and Coca-Cola I mentioned. So yeah, I think going into next year, we're going to start seeing a lot more companies talking publicly. I did think it was interesting how he was sort of wording around the job part of this. You mentioned, the employees managing AI generated digital employees. Why 8 to 10 is a number, I don't know. I would be interested to see where that's coming from. But he also says we don't invest in AI to displace our talent. We invest in AI to help our employees be more productive, continue to protect consumers from fraud, and to drive constant innovation in payments. That was a spokesperson actually from Visa that said that. So, again, I think that the media, every time they're hearing these stories about all this efficiency and gains, they're going to ask the question about jobs.
Yeah.
And I think these are kind of like the boilerplate answers we're going to get for a while, that it's not meant to replace them. Like, it's to give them tools to unlock things. And whether that actually, because in that article, they talked about layoffs at Visa. And so it's just, they're trying to kind of head that that's not why the layoffs are happening, which it may or may not be true.
All right. So in some other news, we're seeing OpenAI taking steps to transform their corporate structure. They have entered into preliminary discussions with regulators to convert from a nonprofit to a for-profit entity, which we knew was happening. And we're getting reports that they're currently engaged in early talks with both the California and Delaware attorneys general offices, marking the beginning of what is likely to be a complex regulatory review process. Now, This transition is not as straightforward as just changing your status. They have to figure out how to properly value and transfer the company's assets, including its AI technology portfolio. According to OpenAI's nonprofit board chairman, Brett Taylor, any restructuring would ensure the nonprofit's continued existence and fair compensation for its current stake in the for-profit entities. The company apparently plans to become a public benefit corporation, which allows it to, at least on paper, maintain its social mission while operating as a for-profit business. And like we've talked about on past episodes, this timing here is a bit crucial because under their recent fundraising terms, the investments that they've raised could convert to debt if the restructuring doesn't occur within a couple of years, I believe, within 2 years of the money being raised. So, Paul, we've talked about this being kind of one of the core near-term challenges for OpenAI. Like, how hard is this going to be for them to pull off?
Well, I'm kind of like laughing to myself at the moment because I'm thinking if Musk wants his vengeance, this is how you use your newfound influence and power is you find a way for federal to throw a wrench in all of this. That would be the ultimate, because this is why he was suing them. So this isn't me just like making up some drama. This is Musk sued them over this thing that they didn't function within this, and they, the money that was put in, they weren't functioning as this nonprofit. And so like there's history here.
Yeah.
And if they can't do this, they're in a whole heap of trouble if this process doesn't work. So yeah, it'll be fascinating to kind of follow this along. I mean, obviously they're not going to want information about this process to be leaked out because it's going to be challenging. But yeah, I feel like this got a lot more interesting now, given Musk's influence on the incoming administration.
Yeah, my guess is this week the timeline for this accelerated pretty quickly.
Yeah, they're going to try to I don't think you can do this in a 2-month period, but they're going to push every button possible, most likely.
All right. And some other OpenAI news. They have acquired one of the internet's oldest and most valuable domain names, chat.com. So this domain, which now redirects to ChatGPT, has kind of an interesting history because the domain was originally purchased last year by HubSpot co-founder Dharmesh Shah, who we've talked about before, for over $15 million. That makes it one of the highest priced domain sales ever publicly reported. Now, Shah also revealed this past week that OpenAI was the unnamed buyer he had talked about selling the domain to, and he suggested that he may have received payment in the form of OpenAI shares. So chat.com is now totally in the hands of OpenAI. I mean, Paul, you know Dharmesh, given your background, you own HubSpot's first ever partner agency. Like, seems like a bet for him that kind of paid off here.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious because Sam literally just tweeted chat.com and on November 6th. And then like the tech world just like went crazy. And Dharmesh posted the story of how it kind of happened on LinkedIn and on X. And yeah, he implied like, he actually used the O1 reasoning model. He gave a prompt, like how much did Dharmesh sell it for? And then it was like, he gave a prompt you could use in O1 to try and figure it out. As far as I know, they didn't disclose anything. My guess is he didn't sell it for much of a profit, if any. He likely just exchanged it for OpenAI shares. Dharmesh is a notorious domain name collector. So like, I have an issue with shoes. Like I like to buy Nike shoes. I think Dharmesh buys domain names. Like I don't know how many he owns, but my guess is it's in thousands. So yeah, I think for Dharmesh, like he said in his LinkedIn post, like he doesn't need the money, like he's doing just fine. So I think this is just like fun for him. And I think the fact that OpenAI is using it, gives Dharmesh some enjoyment, and hopefully he, made out with some OpenAI shares along the way. I mean, Dharmesh is one of my favorite people in the world. He is one of those few people who lives up to your expectations when you actually get to meet someone in person. He has always been just a wonderful, wonderful person for me, for my business. I've known him going back to 2007. So yeah, if you don't know Dharmesh, it couldn't happen to a better guy.
And if you have an idea for a hot domain name you want to buy, maybe check with Dharmesh.
Yeah, he probably
already got it. All right. So next up, Perplexity appears to be on the verge of securing a $500 million investment round led by Institutional Venture Partners, IVP, that potentially values the company at $9 billion. So this represents literally a tripling of the company's value from its previous funding round earlier this year. It would mark Perplexity's fourth funding round in 2024 alone. IVP was a significant backer already. They led Perplexity's Series B. Honestly, Perplexity's growth trajectory, Paul, seems kind of nothing short of explosive. Like we've talked about, in comparison to Google, it's still very much a small fish in the search market, but this certainly seems like they're on the right trajectory.
Yeah, they got to get out of their own way. They're still making a whole bunch of like PR missteps. And, I think Arvind has said he's, learning lessons as a CEO. Like
Yeah.
they've done some very questionable things from a business practice perspective, in my opinion. I love the technology. I'm a huge user of Perplexity, but I feel like they're one of those like rocket ship startups that probably needs some, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but like adults in the room,
Yeah.
like, in the early days of Google and things like that, when these huge explosions of growth happen, like you got to go get some people who know what the hell they're doing and
Mhm.
don't have so many just self-inflicted wounds. So I hope that they figure it out and they keep growing and they modernize the look and feel. As I mentioned last week, I think
Yeah.
ChatGPT search sort of made Perplexity feel obsolete to me from a user experience. So I hope it keeps going, and competition is good in the search market. I think it's pushing Google to think in a more innovative way, and Microsoft and others. Yeah, so I would. A couple things that would not surprise me in 2025 is an adult, like a seasoned leader, is brought in to
Yeah.
help keep things moving in the right direction. If the regulatory stuff, this is the other thing is like I didn't think about this until this moment. Acquisitions
Yeah.
might heat back up with the Trump administration because there's so many issues right now from a regulatory perspective that someone like a Google or Microsoft, I don't think they could ever get an acquisition of Perplexity through in today's environment.
Yeah.
But come next summer, maybe Perplexity it starts becoming a really interesting acquisition target if things cool off from a regulatory perspective on acquisitions in the tech space. I don't know. Interesting.
Well, Perplexity is also in the news, not for as good a
Like I
story
said,
as we just covered, exactly to your point, because Perplexity CEO Aravind Srinivas has stepped into also the middle of a labor dispute at the New York Times. So, Times tech workers went on strike over wage increases and workplace policies. And at the same time, Srinivas publicly offered his company, AI company services to the newspaper, which sparked some backlash. This was right around just days before the US presidential election. Times publisher A.G. Sulzberg expressed concern about the strike's impact on election coverage, and Perplexity CEO responded directly on social media, offering Perplexity's services to ensure coverage remained available through the election period. Now, he kind of tried to later attempt to clarify this was an offer for merely technical infrastructure support, but some people pointed out that that's exactly what the striking workers were providing. So kind of put his foot in it a little bit. Like, Paul, how seriously should we be taking this? Is it just like bad timing, bad communication? Is there more going on here?
uh, yeah, I mean, I think it's just like I was saying, it's a tech CEO who isn't seasoned in this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a strategic PR move to get the publicity, like just to do it. I think he thought it was a clever idea and a way to get some attention, and probably doesn't think through the ramifications to the brand and things like that. Again, I don't know him. I don't know the company deeply, but like from observing them for the last 12 to 18 months pretty closely, there's a lot of this stuff where it's just like if you had someone else in the room who's been through these things before, it could be a head of communications, it could be a president, it could be someone on the board, like whatever it is. There needs to just be somebody there that's helping along to avoid stuff like this.
Right.
It's just sometimes these self-inflicted wounds are so obvious what the outcome is going to be And again, I don't think he wanted that backlash. Some people do this stuff for the backlash, like Elon notoriously will do things just to cause the backlash.
Mhm.
I don't think Aravind is that type of CEO yet. Um, I don't know. I think he just thought it was a good idea and it ended up not being a great idea.
Yeah. And clearly, like, we're also seeing that from a narrative perspective, people are extremely sensitive to anyone related to AI trying to be
Yeah.
seen as potentially harming human workers. And that's a very real concern
Right.
that people have.
Right.
All right. So next up, Anthropic has unveiled Claude 3.5 Haiku, which is an upgrade to their fastest AI model, and it now matches the capabilities of larger models while maintaining its speed. Has very rapid response times. And it turns out Claude 3.5 Haiku surpasses Claude 3 Opus on many intelligence benchmarks, even though it is optimized directly for speed. The model is being rolled out across multiple platforms, including Anthropic's API, Amazon Bedrock, Google Cloud's Vertex AI as well. So the pricing structure appears to reflect Anthropic's push for widespread adoption. It is $1 per million input tokens and $5 per million output tokens. And there are potential cost savings of up to 90% through techniques like prompt caching and additional savings via Anthropic's Message Batches API. Now, companies like Replit have noted substantial improvements in code-related tasks, including reductions in errors and improved reasoning capabilities. So, Paul, this is kind of related to one of our main topics. Like, while there may be some issues with just how much progress we're seeing between each model generation, it sure seems like we're getting way better models for way cheaper still.
Yeah, and the implications to the average listener, the non-developer, non-technical listener here
Yeah.
is the models are getting more powerful. They're getting way cheaper to build things on and to run. And so people are going to innovate and build more and more applications that you're going to be able to use in your industry. Or if you're at a bigger enterprise and you can go build things, it's getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's going to continue to get cheaper for your developers to build things for you. Is kind of again like, and this is just going to keep happening.
Yep.
So as these big frontier models we're talking about, the reality is like your company may more likely to use like a 6 to 12-month-old version of something or the smaller version of the current one, as confusing as all this is, to build things to achieve what you want to achieve without having to pay for like the big model.
So, some other Anthropic news. Apparently, Amazon is in discussions to make another massive investment in Anthropic. That follows their initial $4 billion commitment last year. However, the new deal comes with some strings attached. Amazon wants Anthropic to use servers powered by its own Trainium chips, while Anthropic prefers Amazon servers that use NVIDIA's AI chips. Now, for Amazon, getting Anthropic to adopt its chips could reduce dependency on NVIDIA hardware, so it makes sense for them. For Anthropic, the decision could affect its flexibility to use multiple cloud providers or operate its own data centers in the future. Now, Paul, can you kind of maybe unpack for us the dynamics here? On one hand, it kind of, sounds a little bit like some inside baseball, but it does matter if certain companies are tying people into their ecosystems as part of their funding agreements.
Yeah, I don't know. On the surface, I feel like there's just got to be a lot more to this story and like how this partnership would work. I can't see Anthropic locking themselves in like 100% to something like this. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there's probably a whole bunch of other details. But a more interesting thing is like Amazon's already put like 4 billion into Anthropic as is, or 4.5 billion. So I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about almost like 9 billion. We're starting to get into like the Microsoft OpenAI range where they've put like 13 or 14 billion into OpenAI. Um, and again, like go back to what I just said about regulation and acquisitions and stuff like that, because when I mentioned all the executives that were tweeting, you could throw Jeff Bezos in that group, who tweeted, "Big congratulations to our 45th and now 47th president on an extraordinary political comeback and decisive victory. No nation has bigger opportunities. Wishing at real Donald Trump all success in leading and uniting the America we all love." So, you know, if regulations start to come down and
Yeah.
Amazon sees an opportunity to make Alexa actually work again, and I don't know, like that's one of the things I'm just really anxious to watch is like how this all plays out. But they would be again $8.5 billion invested in a company that's supposedly valued at what 40 billion is the rumor.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a 20% equity stake in one of the frontier model companies. That's not chump change.
In other news, a robotics software company is raising some eyebrows after securing a massive $400 million in early stage funding. So, this company is called Physical Intelligence, and they just raised this money from some pretty significant tech industry heavyweights, including Jeff Bezos, OpenAI, and prominent venture capital firms. So this investment actually values this startup at $2 billion. And basically what they're trying to do is create foundational software that can work across any robot platform. Their flagship software is called Pi Zero, and it has already demonstrated some interesting capabilities, like it has successfully enabled robots to perform everyday tasks like folding laundry, bagging groceries, and handling kitchen operations. So this is kind of coming as we get people like Elon Musk forecasting we're going to have literally billions of humanoid robots in the next couple decades. So, Paul, like this is a pretty big early stage funding round. Like, how closely should we be paying attention to this company?
Well, I mean, obviously, with the investors they have, they're worth paying attention to. I think the bigger story here is just like robotics is going to be a major
Yeah.
area of investment and progress. You're going to see probably a whole bunch of really cool demonstrations going into 2025. They're not going to be wide scale. It's not going to be mass market, but you're going to start to see really impressive stuff, especially as these multimodal language models are embedded in like basically the brains of these robots and the hardware keeps making progress from, NVIDIA to Boston Dynamics to, Figure, which
Right.
Anthrop or Amazon has a big investment in Figure, if I'm not mistaken. So I just, this is going to be a huge area to pay attention to. And sometime later this decade, you'll start to see these things really making an impression from a commercial perspective, like actually having commercial value and being productized. But we're a ways away from that still.
So next up, OpenAI has secured kind of an interesting legal victory. A New York federal judge has dismissed a lawsuit filed by news outlets Raw Story and Alternet that challenged OpenAI's use of their articles to train its AI models. Now, this case focused not on direct copyright infringement, but on the removal of copyright management information from articles used in AI training. So Judge Colleen McMahon, while dismissing this case, left the door open for the outlets to file an amended complaint, though she actually expressed skepticism about their ability to demonstrate sufficient legal injury. So this comes obviously as OpenAI has a number of open lawsuits, including one from the New York Times, which sued them in December 2023. And the judge's decision here actually highlighted a crucial distinction in the case that could have implications elsewhere. She noted that the real issue at stake isn't about copyright management information, but rather about compensation for the use of articles in AI development. So, Paul, when we're looking at this, obviously, as always, we are not lawyers, but how big a deal is this for OpenAI?
Yeah, it seems like this is potentially a really important step. Again, like we got to talk to our IP attorney friends, but the one thread I was looking at said, called out a few key points. Facts on which LLMs train are not copyrightable. That seems like a really important distinction. Gen
Yeah.
AI models synthesize, they don't copy. Data sets they're trained on are vast, so no one work is ever likely to be plagiarized. And regurgitation is, in quotes, by an early LLM version is irrelevant if current versions won't do it. Those are four very interesting notes from the finding. So, I don't know. I mean, we weren't expecting to see case law kind of like emerging
Yeah.
this soon. And I wonder how much of an impact this one might have. And
Fantastic.
that's actually another area to consider with the next administration is what impact that has on the U.S. Copyright Office review of these models and how they're used and how they're
Yeah.
trained. And if we don't maybe see some acceleration of changes to copyright law as a result of this, because that would allow more innovation. And we know that's what they're going to want to do.
And these 4 points you mentioned appear to me to be literally the foundational logic people like the New York Times are using, saying their stuff was stolen.
Yeah, I don't know how this stuff works, but it sure seems to imply that you could see some other cases thrown out if this holds up.
All right. Our last piece of news this week, Paul, is that Google accidentally, it appears, leaked details of its new AI assistant, which is called Jarvis.
Of course, it's Jarvis.
Of course, it's Jarvis. For sure.
Everybody names everything Jarvis.
So this happened in the Chrome web store, and there was like this premature reveal that kind of showed off a few things about what Google's thinking for Jarvis. Jarvis is able to actually take direct control of web browsers to complete everyday tasks, at least according to the leaked description in the Chrome web store. So according to that description, which I believe is now taken down, the AI assistant can independently handle activities like purchasing groceries, booking flights, and conducting research. Google appears to have removed the store page. This was originally planned to be unveiled in December. Paul, regardless, it sounds like we're about to get a possibly competent AI agent from Google.
My guess is you're about to get an impressive demo of an AI agent from Google. Yeah. Like I have said it many times on this. Like to use a tool like this, the computer use that Anthropic showed, OpenAI's got the same thing that everybody's working on this. They are not precise. They are not reliable. They have massive security concerns because you have to give them access to your credit card or your bank account or all these apps. I just don't see this being transformational technology in 2025. I think we're going to get a ton of demos. There's going to be a bunch of hype. There's going to be a bunch of overreaction from media and influencers online who are like game changing and blah, blah, blah. And this is the end of the world. Like it's just progress being made on an inevitable technology that may still take a year or two before it becomes mainstream. It's kind of like high level how I think about all this stuff.
Gotcha. So maybe temper our expectations a little.
Yeah, they may show something and it may look amazing. And so did Sora 8 months ago.
Right.
And now, as I say that, they're probably going to release Sora in like the next 3 weeks. But like, yeah, my point, like and even though when they release it, we're going to be able to get 10 seconds, not 60 seconds and things like that. So this is how this stuff works. Like you show these cool demos, you talk about it, and then like, maybe a year or two, like it's actually reality. Because ChatGPT changed how this stuff works. They dropped ChatGPT on the world and it changed everything. Now we're in this preview everything and then don't release it for 8 months, 12 months, 16 months, whatever it is, or release some early version of it. And that's kind of where we find ourselves in this AI timeline, is everyone races to release demos of things that don't actually work or aren't really ready for us to use. So yeah, I think you just got to like have realistic expectations, but it's probably gonna be really impressive tech.
All right, Paul, that's a wrap for this week. A lot of material to cover. Appreciate you as always, demystifying everything for us, giving us all the context we need. As a couple quick housekeeping reminders, if you have not already, please go subscribe to our newsletter, marketingaiinstitute.com/newsletter. It's called This Week in AI. It gives you all the news you need to know each and every week in a very digestible format. Also, if you have not already and have the ability to, please leave us a review. We really appreciate all the feedback and it helps us make the show better. Paul, thanks so much.
Good stuff, Mike. We will be back next week. We'll figure out if we're doing a Thanksgiving week episode after that. But next week we will be back. And final call, AIforagencies.com. If you are an agency or you use agencies, be a great event for you to attend. All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for listening to The AI Show. Visit marketingaiinstitute.com to continue your AI learning journey and join more than 60,000 professionals and business leaders who have subscribed to the weekly newsletter, downloaded the AI blueprints, attended virtual and in-person events, taken our online AI courses, and engaged in the Slack community. Until next time, stay curious and explore AI.